Welcome back, focused learners, to another explainer. Today, we're taking a journey straight into the pages of what is widely considered one of the most enduring, brilliant, and honestly controversial anti-war novels of all time. We're talking about Kurt Vonnegut's 1969 masterpiece, Slaughterhouse-Five. We're going to unpack the incredible layers of this story and really try to separate the wild science fiction from the brutal historical truths that the whole thing is built upon. Okay, let's dive right into this. Usually, when you pick up a book with time travel and aliens, you're thinking, pure escapist sci-fi. But what if those fantastical elements aren't an escape from reality, but actually a profound, desperate mechanism to survive a reality that is simply too horrific for the human brain to process? Right off the bat, the book opens with this incredibly famous disclaimer. All this happened, more or less. It immediately drops us into the disjointed, semi-autobiographical world of Kurt Vonnegut and his protagonist, Billy Pilgrim. It's a brilliant little line because it instantly blurs the boundary between truth and fiction. Vonnegut is telling us, straight up, that while the names and some of the events are changed, the court trauma, the war parts, are deeply, undeniably true. Section 1. Unstuck in Time, the Sci-Fi Surface. To really get this book, we've got to understand our main guy, Billy Pilgrim, and his completely chaotic existence. Think about a normal life. It's a straight line, right? From birth in 1922 to, eventually dying in 1976. But Billy Pilgrim, he doesn't experience life like that at all. The book tells us he's become unstuck in time, so he experiences all these massive life events just completely spastically. He's randomly jumping between freezing on a World War II battlefield to suddenly examining a patient in his optometry practice to being put on display in an alien zoo. And he has absolutely zero control over where he's going next. And hey, speaking of that alien zoo, we absolutely have to talk about his captors, the Tralfamadorians. They're described as literally looking like upright toilet plungers, with a little hand and a single green eye on top. I mean, it's completely absurd, right? It's deeply comical. Vonnegut is purposely contrasting this weird, almost goofy sci-fi imagery with the incredibly dark underlying trauma of war that we'll explore in just a second. Which brings us to this brilliantly simple core philosophy Billy picks up from them. See, because Tralfamadorians can see all of time simultaneously, they don't look at death as the end. If someone dies, they're just in bad condition in that particular moment, but they're totally fine in others. So their response to death, which becomes this massive recurring motif throughout the entire book, is simply, so it goes. Keep that phrase in mind, because we're going to use it throughout this explainer. Section 2. Decoding Billy's Trauma, the PTSD Reality. Now, what's really interesting about this is how we move right past those plunger-shaped aliens and dive straight into the deep psychological reality beneath his story. To do that, we're leaning on a fascinating academic analysis out of Karlstad University by Nicholas Kimblad. He takes a really deep dive into Billy Pilgrim's mental state. Because Billy's condition isn't just some quirky literary device. It's actually a deeply accurate portrayal of severe trauma. So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding what Billy is actually suffering from. The title page of the book jokingly mentions a schizophrenic manner. And sure, things like hallucinations and delusions, that definitely sounds like schizophrenia. But Kimblad's analysis points out that Billy is actually manifesting severe post-traumatic stress disorder. And remember, PTSD wasn't even an official medical diagnosis when this book was written. So Billy isn't literally time traveling. His mind is experiencing severe dissociative flashbacks. He's constantly re-experiencing his trauma because his brain literally cannot process it linearly. Just contrast those goofy plunger aliens with the actual brutal realities of Billy's trauma. I mean, think about it. He nearly drowned in a YMCA pool as a kid. Then he's thrown into the Battle of the Bulge as this incredibly weak, poorly trained soldier. He watched men die gruesome deaths, he survived one of the worst bombings in human history, and he even saw a good man executed simply for taking a teapot from the rubble. These brutal realities cause Billy to just emotionally shut down. He adopts the alien phrase, "so it goes," because it's literally the only way his mind can shield him from completely breaking apart. But you might be wondering, where exactly did his mind get the aliens from in the first place? Well, after the war, Billy is recovering in a veterans hospital, and he starts reading some obscure sci-fi by this failed author named Kilgore Trout. And one of Trout's books, called The Big Board, is literally about humans being abducted and put into an alien zoo. Billy's subconscious basically took this sci-fi concept and weaponized it into a coping mechanism. It's a survival tool, plain and simple. Section 3. The Dresden firebombing, the historical truth. So, Zooming out from Billy's mind for a second, we really need to look at the historical reality that Kurt Vonnegut himself actually lived through. Throughout the novel, Vonnegut repeatedly claims that 135,000 people died in the firebombing of Dresden, and he based that massive number on a 1963 book by a British author named David Irving. But here's the catch. Historians have since completely discredited Irving, revealing him to be a Nazi sympathizer and a Holocaust denier who heavily manipulated the data. Yeah, modern evidence-based research has firmly corrected that historical record. The actual death toll in Dresden was fewer than 25,000. Now, impartially speaking, even though those numbers were drastically inflated by Irving, the sheer unimaginable horror of what Vonnegut and those civilians lived through in that firestorm remains absolutely catastrophic. It was so incredibly horrific that it actually took Vonnegut decades to even figure out how to write about it. Right in the first chapter, he admits, "I must have written 5,000 pages by now and thrown them all away." I mean, how do you articulate the unspeakable? You don't write a straightforward hero's journey. You write a fragmented, confusing, absurd mosaic, because that is exactly what trauma feels like. Section 4. Banning a masterpiece, the real-world fallout. You'd think a book that captures the raw psychological cost of war so honestly would be universally celebrated. Well, not quite. Let's look at the real-world censorship this classic actually faced. Let's take a trip to Drake, North Dakota. The year is 1973. A high school teacher actually assigned the book to their class, but the head of the school board, Charles McCarthy, stepped in and declared the language obscene. And he didn't just ban the book. He demanded that all 32 copies be thrown directly into the school's furnace and burned. A literal book burning right in America. So it goes. Well, Vonnegut didn't just take that lying down. In response, he wrote this absolutely blistering private letter to the school board titled, "I Am Very Real." They were trying to paint him as this corrupter of youth, but he responds by fiercely defending his character. He asserts his reality, his hard work, and his service to the country, reminding them that he was a combat infantry veteran with a Purple Heart. He continues in the letter, hitting right at the core of their censorship. He essentially says, look, yes, soldiers speak coarsely in the book because soldiers speak coarsely in real life. But he argues that if they had actually bothered to read the text, they'd see the books aren't trying to corrupt anyone. They are begging for humanity to be kinder and more responsible. He points out that it was evil deeds and lying that hurt us, not coarse words. And he wraps up this unabridged, passionate defense of literature with a really powerful sign-off. It's a demand for respect. Not just for himself as a veteran and a citizen, but for the fundamental right to let ideas circulate freely, to expose young minds to reality rather than shielding them with ignorance. Which leaves us with a pretty heavy final thought for today's explainer. When a society actively chooses to burn the very books that expose the unglamorous, traumatizing, brutal reality of war, are they actually protecting their children's innocence? Or are they just hiding the truth and practically ensuring that the next generation blindly marches into the next crusade? Think about that for a while. Keep exploring, and we will see you next time.